If the first transaction and operation was a mortgage and a debt by which man binds himself, how can he with such impatience demand favors? And if in spite of all this the supreme goodness of the Creator furnishes him graciously with what is necessary, why should he be agitated by the want of superfluities? O my daughter, what an execrable disorder, and what a despicable blindness of mortals is this! For that which the Lord gives them gratuitously, they do not thank him, or even give him acknowledgment, and for that which he denies them justly, and sometimes most mercifully, they are restless and proudly desirous, and they try to procure it by unjust and forbidden means, throwing themselves into the very destruction which flies from them. The first sin alone committed by man was sufficient to cancel man's right to the friendly service of all the other creatures, and if the Lord himself would not restrain them, they would turn in vengeance upon man, and refuse to render any service or help for sustaining his life. The heavens would deny them their light and benign influences. The fire would refuse its heat. The air would cease to serve for respiration, and all the other things would in their particular way refuse their services, since they would in justice be bound to refuse them. Then, when the earth would deny its fruits, and the elements their moderation and their assistance, and all the other creatures would arm themselves to avenge the wrongs of their Creator, perhaps disgraced man would humiliate himself in his vileness, and would not heap up the wrath of the Lord for the unerring day of accountance, when all his dreadful guilt will be exposed. But you, my dear friend, fly from such base ingratitude, and humbly acknowledge that you have received your being and life gratuitously, and that gratuitously its author preserves it for you. Freely do you receive all the other benefits without any merit of yours, and thus receiving much and repaying little, you make yourself daily less worthy of favors, while the liberality of the Most High grows continually with your indebtedness. Let this thought be uppermost in you always, in order that it awaken and move you to many acts of virtue. If any of the irrational creatures fail you, I desire you to rejoice in the Lord, and give thanks to his majesty, and bless them for their obedience to the Creator. If the rational creatures persecute you, love them with all your heart, and regard them as the instruments of divine justice, which afford you some opportunity of rendering satisfaction for your deficiency. Rather strengthen and console yourself in labors, adversities, and tribulations, not only considering them as fully deserved by the faults committed, but deeming them ornaments of the soul, and most rich jewels given you by your spouse. Let this be the answer to your doubt. Over and above this, I wish to give you an instruction, which may be found in all the chapters. Consider, my soul, the punctuality of my mother Anne in fulfilling the precept of the law of the Lord, to whose majesty this solicitude was very pleasing. In this you should imitate her by observing inviolate each and every one of the precepts of your rules and constitutions, for God will reward most liberally this fidelity, and severely punish any negligence in this matter. Without sin I was conceived, and it was not necessary to present me to the priest in order that the Lord might purify me. Nor was this necessary for my mother, since she was very holy. Nevertheless, we humbly obeyed the law, and thereby we merited great increase of virtue and grace. Despising just and wise laws, and frequently dispensing with them, destroys the worship and fear of God, and fatally confuses government among men. Beware of easily dispensing in the obligation of the religious state, either for yourself or for others. If infirmity or some other just cause makes it advisable, let it be done with moderation and with the approbation of the confessor, thus justifying dispensation before God and before men by the approbation of holy obedience. If you find yourself weary or weakened, do not at once become remiss in the strict observance, for God will give you strength according to your faith in Him. Do not give any dispensation on pretext of being overworked. Make that which is less serve and advance that which is the greater. Let the creatures serve the Creator. On account of your position as superioress, you have less excuse, for in the observation of the laws you must give a good example, leading on the others. Therefore, for yourself, no merely human motive can serve as an excuse, though you may sometimes excuse your sisters and subjects on such account. Note, moreover, my dearest, that I desire you to lead in perfection. Therefore this rigor is necessary, not even taking into consideration that the observance of the precepts is a duty to God and men. Let no one think that it is enough to fulfill all obligations towards the Lord, and at the same time tread underfoot the duty towards his neighbor, to whom is due good example and avoidance of all real scandal. O Queen and Mistress of all creation, would that I could attain the purity and the virtue of the supernal spirits, in order that this inferior part of my being, which weighs down the soul, may prompt me to fulfill your celestial teachings. I have become burdensome unto myself. But with your intercession and the gracious favor of the Most High, I will be able to obey your will and His with a loving promptitude of heart. Let not your intercession and support, and the guidance of your holy and wise counsels, ever fail me. Chapter 6. Honor due to the guardian angels of the Queen and of the souls. My daughter, on 3 different points I wish to instruct you in this chapter. The first is that you, by incessant praise and acknowledgment, show yourself thankful for the favor which God vouchsafed you in appointing angels to assist you, teach you, and guide you through the tribulations and sorrows. Mortals, in their abominable ingratitude and grossness, ordinarily forget this blessing. They do not consider what great mercy and condescension of the Most High it is to have ordained these holy princes as helpers, guardians, and defenders of men, their earthly fellow creatures, so full of miseries and sins. In forgetting how exalted in glory, dignity, and beauty these spirits are, many men deprive themselves of numerous blessings which they would otherwise obtain at the hands of these angels. Greatly do they rouse the indignation of the Lord on this account. You, however, my dearest, acknowledge these blessings and give Him thanks with all your heart. The second point is that you, in every place and at all times, preserve love and reverence toward these holy spirits, as if you did see them with your corporal eyes, and that you dare not do before them what you would not do in public. Cease not to exert yourself in the service of God, even as they do, and as they require of you. Remember that they continually see the face of God. Matthew chapter 17, verse 10. Being of the blessed. Since they at the same time see you, let there be nothing indecent in you. Show yourself grateful to them for their vigilance, defense, and protection. Let the third point be that you live attentive to the calls, urgings, and aspirations by which these angels seek to rouse you, move and excite you to the recollection of the Most High, and to the exercise of all the virtues. Be mindful how often they have responded to your calls, how often they have placed themselves in the way of your seeking, how often they have solicited for you signs of the love of the spouse, kindly reprehending you for your carelessness and remissness. When you did lose in your troubles and weariness the guiding star of His light, they renewed hope in your breast, and patiently corrected you, directing your footsteps again into the narrow path of the justifications and testimonies of the Lord. Do not forget, my soul, the greatness of the benefits bestowed upon you in these angels. for they are above those of many nations and generations. Strive to be grateful to your Lord and to the angels, his ministers. Chapter 7. The wonderful silence of the Queen, and how it is to be imitated. My daughter, he that received more ought to consider himself more needy, since his debt becomes so much the greater. All should humiliate themselves, since of themselves they are nothing, nor can they do anything or possess aught. On this account they that are raised up by the hand of the Almighty should humiliate themselves as mere dust. For left to themselves and to their nothingness and unworthiness, they should esteem themselves so much the more indebted and bound to thankfulness for that which by themselves they can never repay. Let man acknowledge its condition, for no one can say, I have made myself, I preserve myself in existence, I can prolong my life or postpone death. All his being and preservation is in the hands of the Lord. Let each one therefore humble himself in his presence, and you, my dearest, do not forget these truths. I wish also that you esteem as a great treasure the virtue of silence, which I have practiced from my birth. By the light which the Most High gave me, I was conversant with all the virtues, but I attached myself to this one with great predilection, resolving to adhere to it as a companion and as a friend during all my life. Therefore I kept it inviolate, although I could speak from the moment of my entrance into the world. To speak without moderation and forethought is a two-edged sword, which wounds both him that speaks and him that hears, and thus in two ways destroys charity or hinders it in all the virtues. From this you can understand how much God is offended by the vice of inconsiderate and loose talk, and how justly loquacity and the tumult of disputation estranges his spirit and veils his presence. For those that talk much cannot keep free from grievous sins. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19. Only with God and with his saints one can speak with security, and even then it must be with forethought and discretion. With creatures it is very difficult to preserve the golden middle, without danger of passing from the correct and necessary to the imperfect and superfluous. The way to avoid this danger is to tend continually toward the other extreme, striving rather to reflect and be silent. For the prudent medium of speaking only what is necessary is found more in reflection than in immoderate speech. Remember, my soul, that you cannot disport yourself in self-sought conversation with creatures without relinquishing God in the secret interior of your soul, and that which you cannot do without impudence and insult in your intercourse with other creatures, you should not do in your dealings with your Lord and the Lord of all. Close your ears to the deceitful conversations which might induce you to speak what you should not, for it is not just that you speak more than what is enjoined you by your Lord and Master. Listen to his holy law, which he has, with so liberal a hand, written in your heart. Hear the voice of your pastor, and answer him there, and him only. I wish to impress you with the fact that if you are to be my disciple and companion, it must be by signalizing yourself especially in this virtue of silence. Reflect much, and write this doctrine in your heart today, and attach yourself more and more to this virtue. For first I wish to see you established in this, and then I will teach you how to speak. I do not dissuade you from speaking words of admonition and consolation to your daughters and your subjects. Speak also with those who can give you tokens of your beloved, and who can instruct and inflame you with his love. In such kind of conversation you will acquire a profitable silence of the soul, since in them is excited a horror and disgust for conversation of men, and you will learn to relish conversation about the wished-for eternal good only. Then with the force of love transforming your being into that of your beloved, the impetus of your passions will weaken, and you shall arrive at that kind of sweet martyrdom which I suffered when I complained of my body and of mortal life. For they seemed to me a dreary imprisonment which hindered my flight, although not my love. O my daughter, forget all the earthly things in the hiding place of your silence, and imitate me with all your fervor and all your strength. For thus shall you arrive at that state to which your spouse invites you. There you shall hear the consoling words which sustained me in the pangs of my love. My dove, dilate your heart, and give admission, my cherished one, to that sweet pain, for my heart is wounded by your love. Thus the Lord spoke to me, and this you yourself have heard repeatedly, for to those that are alone and in silence does his majesty speak. Chapter 8. The Desire of Retirement in the Queen, a Sweet Example for the Soul. My dearest daughter, keep in mind that all the living are born destined for death, but ignorant of the time allowed them. This they know for certain, however, that the term of life is short, that eternity is without end, and that in this life only they can harvest what will yield life or death eternal. In this dangerous pilgrimage of life God has ordained that no one shall know for certain whether he is worthy of his love or hate. For if he uses his reason rightly, this uncertainty will urge him to seek with all his powers the friendship of that same Lord. God justifies his cause as soon as the soul acquires the use of reason, for from that time onward he enlightens and urges and guides man toward virtue, and draws him away from sin, teaching him to distinguish between water and fire, to approve of the good and reject evil, to choose virtue and repel vice. Moreover, God calls and rouses the soul by his holy inspirations and continual promptings, provides the help of the sacraments, doctrines, and commandments, urges man onward through his angels, preachers, confessors, ministers, and teachers, by special tribulations and favors, by the example of strangers, by trials, deaths, and other happenings and dispositions of his providence. He disposes the things of life so as to draw toward him all men, for he wishes all to be saved. Thus he places at the disposal of the creature a vast field of benevolent help and assistance, which it can and should use for its own advancement. Opposing all this are the tendencies of the inferior and sensitive nature, the foment of sin, tending toward sensible objects, and by the lower appetites and repugnances, disturbing the reason and enthralling the will in the false liberty of ungoverned desires. The demon also, by his fascinations and his deceitful and iniquitous suggestions, obscures the interior light, and hides the deathly poison beneath the pleasant exterior. But the Most High does not immediately forsake his creatures. He renews his mercy and his assistance, recalling them again and again, and if they respond to his first call, he adds others according to his equity, increasing and multiplying them in proportion as the soul corresponds. As a reward of the victory which the soul wins over itself, the force of his passions and concupiscences is diminished. The spirit is made free to soar higher and rise above its own inclinations and above the demons. But if man neglects to rise above his low desires and his forgetfulness, he yields to the enemy of God and man. The more he alienates himself from the goodness of God, so much the more unworthy does he become of the secret callings of the Most High, and so much the less does he appreciate his assistance, though it be great. For the demon and the passions have obtained a greater dominion and power over his intellect, and have made him more unfit and more incapable of the grace of the Almighty. Thereon, my dear daughter, rests the whole salvation or condemnation of souls, that is, in commencing to admit or resist the advances of the Lord. I desire you not to forget this doctrine, so that you may respond to the many calls which you receive of the Most High. See you be strong in resisting his enemies, and punctually solicitous in fulfilling the pleasure of your Lord, for thereby you will gratify him, and attend to the commands made known to you by divine light. I loved my parents dearly, and the tender words of my mother wounded my heart, but as I knew it to be the will of the Lord to leave them, I forgot her house and my people in order to follow my spouse. The proper education and instruction of children will do much toward making them more free and habituated to the practice of virtue, since thus they will be accustomed to follow the sure and safe guiding star of reason from its first dawn. Chapter 9. Mary in the Temple, an urgent invitation to withdrawal from worldliness. My daughter, the greatest happiness which can befall any soul in this mortal life is that the Almighty call her to his house, consecrated to his service. For by this benefit he rescues the soul from a dangerous slavery, and relieves her of the vile servitude of the world, where, deprived of true liberty, she eats her bread in the sweat of her brow. Who is so dull and insipid as not to know the dangers of the worldly life, which is hampered by all the abominable and most wicked laws and customs introduced by the astuteness of the devil and the perversity of men? The better part is religious life and retirement. In it is found security. Outside is a torment and a stormy sea, full of sorrow and unhappiness. Through the hardness of their heart and the total forgetfulness of themselves, men do not know this truth and are not attracted by its blessings. But you, O soul, be not deaf to the voice of the Most High. Attend and correspond to it in your actions. I wish to remind you that one of the greatest snares of the demon is to counteract the call of the Lord, whenever he seeks to attract and incline the soul to a life of perfection in his service. Even by itself, the public and sacred act of receiving the habit and entering religion, although it is not always performed with proper fervor and purity of intention, is enough to rouse the wrath and fury of the infernal dragon and his demons. For they know that this act tends not only to the glory of the Lord and the joy of the holy angels, but that religious life will bring the soul to holiness and perfection. It very often happens that they who have received the habit with earthly and human motives are afterwards visited by divine grace, which perfects them and sets all things aright. If this is possible even when the beginning was without a good intention, how much more powerful and efficacious will be the light and influence of grace and the discipline of religious life when the soul enters under the influence of divine love, and with a sincere and earnest desire of finding God and of serving and loving him. Before the Most High reforms or advances those who for any reason enter the religious state, it is no more than right that in turning away from the world they avert also their eyes from it, and blot out from their memory all its images, forgetting all that they have in so praiseworthy a manner left behind. Those that neglect this requirement and are ungrateful and disloyal toward God will doubtlessly fall under the punishment of the wife of Lot. And if on account of the goodness of God they do not suffer this punishment in an equally open and visible manner, they nevertheless undergo it interiorly, remaining congealed and full of dryness, without fervor or advance in virtue. Forsaken by grace, they thus do not attain the end of their vocation, make no progress in religion, nor find any spiritual consolation in it, and do not merit to be visited by the Lord as children, but to be left to their own resources like unfaithful and fugitive slaves. Remember that for you all the world must be crucified and dead, that you must have for it no memory, retain none of its images, pay it no attention, nor have any inclination toward any of its creatures. If sometimes it is necessary to exercise charity with your neighbors, see that you ordain it well, and that you safeguard beforehand the good of your soul, its security and quiet, its interior tranquillity and peace. In these points, as far as is possible without sin, I admonish and command you to go to the greatest extremes, if you wish to remain in my school. Chapter 10. Special favors of the Queen, pointing out the right use of God's graces. Do not forget, my dearest, that the religious state is consecrated and ordained by the Most High for maintaining the doctrine of Christian perfection and the close imitation of the life of my Son, and that therefore the souls who in religious life are sunk in sleepy forgetfulness of their high blessing and lead a life more listless and lax than many worldly men are objects of great wrath of the Lord, and a severer judgment and chastisement awaits them than others. The demon also, ancient and astute serpent as he is, uses more diligence in his attempts to overcome religious men and women than to conquer all the rest of worldly men. And if one of these religious fall, all hell exerts the greatest solicitude and care to prevent his using the many means which religion affords for rising from a fall, such as obedience and holy exercises and the frequent use of the sacraments. To make all these remedies miscarry and be of no use to the fallen religious, the enemy applies so many cunning snares that it would fill with terror any one who saw them. However, much of this is recognized in the actions and artifices by which a lax religious soul tries to defend its remissness, excusing it by spacious arguments, if it does not break out in disobedience and yet greater disorders and faults. Be careful, therefore, my daughter, and fear so dreadful a danger. By divine assistance of grace, raise yourself above yourself, never permitting your will to consent to any disorderly affection or movement. I wish you to consume yourself in dying to your passions, and in becoming entirely spiritualized, so that having extinguished within you all that is of earth, you may come to lead an angelic life and conversation. In order to deserve the name of spouse of Christ, you must pass beyond the limits and the sphere of a human being, and ascend to another state and divine existence. Although you are earth, you must be a blessed earth, without the thorns of passion, one whose fruit is all for the Lord, its master. If you have for your spouse that supreme and mighty Lord, who is the King of kings and the Lord of lords, consider it beneath your dignity to turn your eyes, and much more your heart, toward such vile slaves as are the human creatures, for even the angels love and respect you for your dignity as spouse of the Most High. If even among men it is held to be a daring and boundless insolence in a plebeian to cast longing eyes upon the spouse of a prince, what a crime would it be to cast them on the spouse of the heavenly and omnipotent King? And it would not be a smaller crime if she herself would receive and consent to such familiarity. Consider and assure yourself that the punishment reserved for this sin is inconceivably terrible, and I do not show it to you visibly, lest you perish in your weakness. I wish that for you my instructions suffice to urge you to the fulfillment of all I admonish, and to imitate me as my disciple as far as your powers go. Be also solicitous in recalling this instruction to the mind of your nuns, and in seeing that they live up to it. My mistress and my most kind Queen, in the joy of my soul I listen to your sweetest words, so full of spirit and of life, and I wish to inscribe them in the interior of my heart, together with the graces of your most holy Son, which I beseech you to obtain for me. If you give me permission, I will speak in your presence as an ignorant disciple with her mistress and teacher. I desire, O my mother and protectress, though I am so unworthy and remiss, to fulfill the 4 vows of my profession according to your commands and according to my obligation. Though I am so unworthy and remiss therein, yet I beseech you, give me a more full instruction, which may serve me as a guide and direction in the fulfillment of this duty, and as a complement of these vows, which you have placed in my heart. Chapter 11. Instruction of the Queen of Heaven regarding the vows of religion. My dear daughter, I will not deny you the instruction you ask of me with the desire of putting it into practice, but do you receive it with an appreciative and devout mind, ready to follow it indeed. The wise man says, My son, if you be surety for your friend, you have engaged fast your hand to a stranger, you are ensnared with the words of your mouth, and caught with your own words. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 12. Accordingly, he who has made vows to God has bound his own will, so that he has no freedom of acting except according to the will and direction of him to whom he has bound himself. For he is chained down by the words of his own mouth, uttered in the profession of his vows. Before taking his vows, the choice of his ways was in his own hands, but having once bound and obliged himself, let him know that he has entirely lost his liberty, and had delivered himself up to God in his superiors. The whole ruin or salvation of souls depends upon the use of their free will, but since most men use it ill and damn themselves, the Most High has established religious life under the sacred vows. Thus the creature, by once using its liberty to make a perfect and prudent choice, can deliver up to its majesty that very liberty which so many pervert, if it remains free and unhampered in its choice. By these vows, the liberty to do evil is happily lost, and the liberty for doing good is assured. It is like a bridle, which leads away from danger and directs into the smooth and sure road. The soul is freed from the slavery and subjection of the passions, and acquires a new power over them, resuming her place as mistress and queen in the government of her kingdom, and remaining subject only to the law of grace and the inspirations of the Holy Ghost. If she thus applies her whole will solely to the fulfillment of all that she has promised to God, the Holy Spirit will govern and direct all her operations. The creature thereby passes from the condition and state of a slave to that of a child of the Most High, from an earthly to an angelic life, while the corruption and evil effects of sin cannot exert their full power. It is impossible that you will ever be able in this earthly life to calculate or comprehend what and how many are the blessings and treasures those souls gather for themselves, who with all their powers and affections strive to fulfill perfectly the vows of their perfection. For I assure you, my dearest, that those who are perfect and punctual in their religious obligations can equal and even surpass the martyrs in merit. My daughter, you did happily begin to gather these blessings on the day when you did choose the better part. But remember well that you have bound yourself to the eternal and mighty God, to whom the inmost secrets of your heart are manifest. If it is so base and detestable to deceive and disappoint men in just promises, how vile it is to be unfaithful to God in the most just and holy promises. As your Creator, Preserver, and Benefactor, He claims your gratitude. As Father, your reverence. As Spouse, your fidelity. As a friend, amicable intercourse. As the most faithful, He should excite your faith and hope. As the highest and eternal good, He should possess your love. As the Almighty, your entire subjection. As the most just judge, He should rouse your humble and holy fear. Against all these allegiances and many others, you committest perfidious treason in failing or hesitating to fulfill what you have promised according to your profession. And if in all the nuns who have obliged themselves to a spiritual life and conversation, it is such a monstrous and terrible abomination to call themselves spouses of Christ, while living as members and slaves of the devil, how much more abominable will it be in you, who has received more than they all, and therefore should exceed them in loving and exerting yourself to make a return for such incomparable blessings and benefits. To be convinced that there are no small faults for you and for your state is a powerful means of saving yourself. Fear greatly the small things, for in not despising small faults, the Most High knows that the human heart invites other greater ones. That is not a blameless love, which doth not avoid all displeasure of the beloved one.
This program was produced and distributed by Keep the Faith. Don't forget to write for a free catalog of publications, audio cassettes, and our new offering of video cassettes. For a free catalog, write Keep the Faith, 810 Belmont Avenue, Post Office Box 8261, North Haledon, New Jersey, 07508.
Mr.